On NEA Report, it's the talk of the town, the Malco Town Cinema wanting to serve alcohol. But the theater has been denied their liquor permit by the ABC director. However, it's not over yet, this battle, and we're going to tell you where it goes next. We're also going to tell you how we got here, including with the letter that NEA Report obtained through Freedom of Information Act request from the prosecutor. It may have been the pivotal moment that the debate shifted from what was a probable approval to now denial by the ABC director. We've also got more first reported today by NEA Report on this story, and we'll even go through the letter from the senior vice president of the Malco Theaters. It's a scathing letter where he voices his disapproval to these objections, and we find out today new context because we learned it was written after the denial. That's next on NEA Report. For most locations across the U.S., if a private business wanted to serve alcohol, of course they would still have to have the proper permitting, but it would be much less of an arduous process as it is in Arkansas and in Northeast Arkansas and Craighead County, where we're a dry county. And we're not here to debate the merits of that. A lot of people will debate that in the comments, and you can have at it. We're also not here to cast a decision or a vote as to our decision as to what should be done on this. We're just going to take you through what's happened, and you can decide how you feel about this, whether you're for or against Malcohol, as we'll call it today. We're talking about the Malco Town Cinema serving alcohol in their movie theater in Jonesboro and Parker Road. I'm going to talk about this from the beginning, or at least where it somewhat sort of began, all the way to the present. Now, it actually began before September 4th, but that was when the city council approved, barely, the request, the permit to serve alcohol. The council doesn't make the final decision on this. It has to go all the way to the ABC board in Little Rock, but usually when the council approves it, it happens. Because the reasoning behind that is if you have city leaders such as the police chief or the mayor opposing it, well, they're going to usually have a voice there at the council. If the sheriff or the prosecutor opposes it, they would also be likely to make their voice heard in that regard. But as the letter from the Malco senior vice president shows, we'll get to in a minute, support for this has gone from what was seemingly overall positive into a split type of debate where people are, and 50-50 may be generous to one side. It seems like many people are against this in the community, for better or for worse. We're not here to judge. But we'll tell you where it began, at least as far as officially, with the city council on September 4th making their vote. And it was a vote that was split down the middle, but the mayor cast the deciding vote to allow it to happen. And that approved it, at least that part of the process, because the next part was for the permit request to be sent to the Department of Finance and Administration's ABC board. And they would make the decision, which, as we even said, and erroneously I might add, yep, we made a mistake and we'll admit to it, that was what would have seemed to be a process that would have seen it confirmed. But it wasn't. And we know now why. The process, by the way, got hung up for a while, as we'll get to here in a minute, because we're going to jump several months without much happening, but at least 1 month where nothing happened. So the next thing to take place after the September 4th vote was on September 26th. And that was a letter by the prosecutor, Scott Ellington. He wrote a letter to the ABC director, and it was a pretty adamant statement of disapproval. And I'll read it exactly to you. You can read the full thing at neareport.com. He says, I object to Malco Hollywood Theater's application for a permit to sell alcohol as a private club here in Jonesboro. Ellington went on to say, as prosecutor, public safety is my chief responsibility. I believe monitoring alcohol consumption within such a darkened, loud environment as a movie screening will be a nightmare. His word exactly. I can foresee alcohol being shared with minors, intentionally or unintentionally, inside the darkened theaters while movies are being shown. In worst case scenarios, it could make it easier for minors to become victims of abuse. I cannot allow that, Ellington writes. Furthermore, movie theaters have long been where families gather and spend time together. For example, he says, so as long as Malco cinemas have been in Jonesboro, many families have made their way to the theater after lunch on Christmas Day as a family tradition. Therefore, I object, he writes and concludes in the letter, to the Malco Hollywood Cinema being awarded a permit to sell alcohol as a private club. Now, if you're looking at the photo, you're saying Malco Hollywood Cinema is not what's on the... Yes, they changed their name, but it's the same place we're talking about. Malco Town Cinema, or as it's been known forever until a few months ago, the Malco Hollywood Cinema. And so this letter, although it wasn't the only letter in objection to this, it was probably the most important. I found out there were 19, I believe, letters in objection to this written. Some of those included a pastor from Walnut Ridge, Bob Hester, who we sort of knew would object. And there was even a petition submitted with 60 signatures or so against it. Not sure exactly where or why 60 were submitted. It may have been a church congregation or something like that, but I'm just speculating because I didn't look at the exact letter, the petition. But I did find the number as far as were submitted, and there were, a number of them, 18 to 19 at least. And here's another point. Although those obviously would have been read and factored into any decision, Ellington's letter met another standard for this, because from what I've learned, as soon as either a sheriff, a police chief, or a prosecutor objects to the permit being granted, it's an automatic denial, at least by the ABC director. From there, it goes into an appeal process. Now, you're going to notice on those dates, we went from September 26th to November 13th. What happened there? Well, we don't have that exact answer. It's just a process. For some reason, they got hung up. And we can also tell you it's probably going to get hung up again. It may even be January before it gets decided, because from what we found out today, the Malco is still working on this, and they do plan to appeal the decision, but we'll get to all that in a second. So on November 13th, the ABC director denied the request. If you're saying, why didn't we know before now? Because we just found it out today, 14 days later. Yeah. Sorry, but that's when we did. We learned about that decision. It's not like they put those out there unless you contact them and request that information. But what we did also find out was that letter, which we had actually been tipped off about. That's where we also found the decision. And so the ABC director denied it. It's now going to become an issue that will go before the ABC board during the appeal process. Right? Well, if you remember, it was November 20th. And many of you may not have seen this letter, so I'll kind of go through it and tell you what it says. But on November 20th, the senior vice president of Malco Theaters wrote a scathing letter. A lot of people contacted me and were really surprised by that. And it was Jonesboro Sun content, right? So it's not like I'm going to publish that. You should subscribe to the Jonesboro Sun if you want to read that. And generally speaking, I think you should anyway. The letter says, I'll just go through it here. And it says, as a member of the Jonesboro economic community, Malco Theaters is very disappointed in the recent barrage of ill will spent on our business growth opportunities. He writes, Malco Theaters is an Arkansas-based corporation founded more than 100 years ago with the intent to bring Hollywood to the Mid-South. He says it's been the overwhelming resolve for Malco Theaters to be a positive part of the communities where we show movies. I'll pull up the Jonesboro Sun website so you can actually see this while I'm going through it. And so there it is. That's the article if you want to go to the Jonesboro Sun's website, jonesborosun.com. It's under opinion. Scroll down to November 20th if you want to find that actual article. It's a guest column, and as you can see there, by Larry Etter. Malco's invested more than $100 million in developing theaters in Arkansas, spending $20 million in private investments to continue retail developments in Jonesboro. And then it mentions theaters bring crowds. and adjoining businesses need crowds. It even goes on to mention retail developers will attest every well-run cinema that shares its parking spaces will shape the surrounding retail shops and create economic prosperity. And you got to consider over there too. They just had Steak and Shake put in. They just got, well, they don't just have it, but Colton's is over there. But they also have O'Charlie's. They not long ago got a Checkers, but I think that's been there for a minute or two now. There's a what is it, Candela's maybe, or maybe it's something else. But there's a Mexican restaurant over there as well. The place is booming as far as business goes. So if they're pointing that out, that's correct as far as that. But it says that recently Malco applied for its approval to offer alcoholic beverages to enhance the theater-going experience. It says part of that application process is filing through the city of Jonesboro, and therefore it's an open application. I am educated, it says, to the practice that Craighead County is dry. However, your community is selling alcohol in various businesses such as restaurants, hotels, and country clubs. It goes on to say the city of Jonesboro has given private club authorization to restaurants that share the parking lot with the Malco Hollywood. In other words, while Craighead County is dry, the diverse population wishes to have adult beverages. They are provided in multiple types of retail establishments. He goes on to say the city recently approved a license at its newest convention hotel. But he says some residents have become biased and prejudiced against one of the longest-running family-based entities for being progressive and bringing Jonesboro above the current standard of exhibition facilities offered in other municipalities. It says, I applaud Jason Ruffcar and his rational thinking. By the way, just for those of you who don't know, Jason Ruffcar was Booger on Kiss FM with Brandon Baxter in the morning. But that's who he's talking about. He also writes letters to the editor and pretty commonly, and so I just point that out for context. Nothing more. The objection to Malco Theaters aligning itself with other respected entertainment is biased and prejudiced. He says the Arkansas State University sells beer in its stadium for football games, and alcohol can be found in the private suites and luxury boxes. He says this state university has a population that's overwhelmingly under the legal drinking age. The arena in Jonesboro sells beer and alcohol for its concerts. He writes, why? Because the population is requesting it, and the city officials find it acceptable to sell alcohol at these events. The senior vice president writes that the truth is that fewer than 30% of tickets sold to patrons in a movie are under the age of 21. So he said, doing the math, 70% of people are over the legal age. He said, and we expect they have good sense and high morals. So he goes on to write, I stood before the city council and the mayor on August 6th. As I mentioned, this was being read several months before the vote took place. He said, I discussed the intentions of this venture. And he said, I discussed the depth, the precautions they intended to take. Underage consumption would not be a thing, he says. He said he discussed the security they have to prevent transfer of alcoholic beverages to minors. He can state unequivocally, our safeguards, he says, are stronger than anyone else in your community, as announced by our own police chief in an article printed by the Jonesboro Sun. And yes, Police Chief Rick Elliott did write a letter stating that. I'll talk about that more in a second. He goes on to write, I discussed the selling procedures. No one could buy more than 2 drinks while at the theater. That's what has been reported, but one of the reports by KAIT said 2 drinks would be sold to an individual per hour, which is very different than just 2 drinks per visit, because a movie itself can last 2 or 3 hours, depending on the movie, can last sometimes 2.5 hours, like the Star Wars, I think The Last Jedi was 2 hours, 41 minutes. It felt like 20 hours. But anyway, I think that there's a little bit of a difference there in kind of what's been reported and what he's saying, and that might matter. It would also be interesting to know, and it's not stated in his letter, but are the alcoholic beverages going to be allowed to be taken from the bar area, wherever that is going to be, and into the movie screening? We don't have the answer for that, but we have reached out to Malco, and we hope to get a lot of these questions answered. It's a letter that continues on to say, as a matter of fact, it requires more work and more intervention than ever. It's not a Malco employee gaining a single thing, he says, from this debate. He says, because no Malco employee can consume alcohol at the property. He says, Jonesboro should know Malco theaters take this process seriously. But he says, I do not believe Mayor Perrin should take the blame. He said, well, he said out of 11 council members, 6 voted in favor, meaning 6 other civic leaders believe in this adaptation. For a multitude of years, he states, you in the community have been sneaking in contraband. Yep. You sneak in your candy, your snacks, and your sodas. Imagine that. This holy community is actually cheating the proprietor. Yep. We clean up your trash that you smuggle in. We have confiscated alcohol, and we have babysat your teenagers for more than 100 years. And now you speculate how we can manage a restaurant atmosphere. Does this community understand how hypocritical it is? Wow, what a statement. After asking if Northeast Arkansas and Jonesboro understands how hypocritical it is, the senior vice president continues writing, continuing in the vein of premium theater offerings. He says, we want to extend the food and beverage options to include more substantial restaurant amenities. Somebody in chat, tell me how that's said. I invite any of you to stop by the theater and see the enriched menu that we use in 14 other renovated theaters or new construction projects. He says, we will not become Jonesboro's newest steakhouse or nightclub, but he said a lot of their customers or moviegoers told him they'd like a light meal, casual appetizers, and a glass of wine while they watched the film on screen. Believe it or not, he says, our industry's been challenged by Netflix, live streaming, and other video-on-demand properties that influence if people can stay home or if they go out to a movie. He says we must meet those recommendations of our potential customers, or we, and I say this as an industry, will go out of business. He writes that technology challenged Malco to change and improve the dynamics of their services. He said we would much rather save money on improvements and leave things as status quo. We would much rather serve popcorn, sodas, and candy. It's easier and certainly more profitable. However, it's not what the clientele wants. He goes on to say, residents of Jonesboro, feel free to contact other communities in which Malco operates and inquire as to the specifics of the improvements we have made. He says, ask the city officials what they think, from Rogers, Arkansas to Owensboro, Kentucky. And he finishes writing, I can assure Reverend Rogers, no one has been killed in more than 20 years of operating these type of operations. That's signed Larry Etter, the senior vice president of Malco Theaters, Inc. And if you've not read it yourself, you really should go read that letter. I linked it in our article at neareport.com, but as I said, it's at Jonesboro Sun's website. Well worth looking at. And so that letter, we now know why he was that angry, quite frankly. Because if you read that letter and you don't know what's going on, it seemed like he was upset. But if you take a look at the fact that his request had just been denied, and we know why, well, that was an angry letter that he wrote in response to that. So I reached out to Malco today to ask if they had any comment. They've not responded. I'll even check my email while I'm sitting here talking to all of you, just in case something come through since then. But it is the day before Thanksgiving, so they may be out. And if they do come back and give us an update, we'll add that to the story. So if you're listening to this and it's been a few days, neareport.com, look at the story just in case to find out the latest. But as far as other responses go, I mentioned to you the mayor had cast the vote for this, the deciding vote. He later actually come out and told the Jonesboro Sun he had regrets about that vote. The police chief, before the mayor kind of changed his mind or had a change of heart on that, the police chief, flat out said he doesn't think there's going to be any issues with this. Obviously, the prosecutor that his department refers felony cases to disagrees with that. Of course, Scott Ellington is the prosecutor over felony cases. The misdemeanor cases would be done by the city attorney's office, Carol Duncan. And don't get me started on explaining Arkansas legalities and the difference between a judicial district prosecutor who goes before a circuit judge and a district judge who has cases brought before them by the city attorney. It's very confusing here, even for us that work in it. But the letters that were out there, short of the mayor who did kind of change a little on that, everybody made their position pretty clear. And as far as law enforcement goes, from what I understand, the sheriff, Marty Boyd, has not lodged a protest to this, and neither did the police chief, as we know, based on his public stance. So, yes, it was the prosecutors. It was Scott Ellington's that possibly came down to the deciding reason why. But it's hard to just leave it at that and say that because there were over a dozen letters in opposition to this. 60 people signed one petition. So at a minimum, it probably did need to be heard again. The question is, when will it be heard again, right? What's next? So today, here's where the story is at. As of right now, from what we understand from ABC, Malco is preparing their appeal. They have an attorney working on this, and I say an attorney, it may be more than one, but the effort now is to make sure that the next time they bring this before Little Rock, that they get what they want. They get the yes. If they should or not, that's for, well, it's really not for me or you to decide. Well, I was going to say it's for you to decide. And it is for you to make up your opinion on that. But it's going to be decided by the ABC board because now they have to go through the appeal process. And yes, your word does matter, clearly. The question is, who's going to be the loudest about this? Sometimes the opposition is the most loud. Other times, it's the support, but not usually. So, it'll be interesting to see what decision and what direction the ABC board takes. But it's also, it's quite frankly, it's riveting stuff whenever you go and you look at the statement that was issued by the Malco Senior Vice President. And the word being hypocritical. I just can't get over that. Got to read it one more time. Does this community understand how hypocritical it is? It's one heck of a question. And it's one that we are, at least today, not equipped. So let's tell you about some of the other top headlines from NEAReport.com. Not only was the movie theater a big story today, but also one of our friends here at NEA Report, a morning radio host, Michael Steele, recovering from a massive heart attack. It happened after his morning show on 95.9 The Wolf Monday morning. It was following the show that he wasn't feeling well and went home. We're told by Brandon Baxter that it ended up being what was a serious heart attack. Steele described it as a widowmaker. Of course, in his normal sense of humor, he also told me to mention to the audience that his wife didn't know it was a widowmaker and called the ambulance, 911. And thankfully, he was rushed to St. Bernard's Emergency Department in a hurry. They saved his life. As of this morning, he was waiting to go home, but he's in good spirits. I can tell you he was joking with me today. If you know Michael Steele, you know that mornings probably would not be the same here without him. He's been on the radio for decades. And when I worked at KISS FM, he was there as well. So the East Arkansas Broadcasters group of stations owns the same as KISS and 95.9 The Wolf and K-Fine. His buddy Brandon Baxter was very emotional telling me about that too. Glad that Michael is okay. Another story to tell you about on NEAReport.com is that a new judge has been assigned in the Linda Collins Smith murder case. We're talking about the capital murder charges that Rebecca O'Donnell would be facing, or capital murder charge. As of November 27th, according to Area-Wide Media's Lauren Siebert, the Second Judicial Circuit Judge John Fogelman was assigned as a special judge in the case. Now, the strange thing about this, now this decision, number one, was made by the Arkansas Supreme Court. They're getting involved. This is the second new judge that has been appointed. Judge David Goodson was removed as special judge in the case. He had replaced Judge Harold Irwin in the case. But if you recall, the victim in this, Linda Collins Smith's husband, Phil Smith, longtime circuit judge in the area. But he was also a circuit judge over the prosecutor, Henry Boyce. So it's strange that these judges are all having to recuse, but the prosecutor doesn't. It's also strange that a change of venue hasn't taken place, at least as of yet in the case, but it makes you wonder how much longer that's going to go before it does. It's hard to imagine in a community as small as Northeast Arkansas, the murder of one of their state senators, former state senator Linda Collins Smith, would not leave the jury pool tainted. Nonetheless, the prosecutor has, at least it seems, attempted to keep the case in Randolph County, and we'll keep following it. As of now, the trial date, and this is not a mistake, is October of 2020, almost a full year from now, and that was actually sooner than the defense wanted. This is a capital murder case, meaning that Rebecca O'Donnell, who was Linda Collins Smith's former campaign aide and one of her best friends. Well, O'Donnell faces the death penalty potentially in this case. Also another story, and a disturbing one, on NEAreport.com. 12 dogs found living in a filthy home in Jonesboro. Graphic stuff if you go to the website and look at it. I don't want to show all the photos here on the broadcast, but this is one of the photos that was taken, one of the only ones I really feel comfortable showing, because the others showed dog feces. Literally every step you would take, you would be stepping in dog feces. And I know the word literally is overused online, but I don't think you could get one foot in front of the other without touching dog poop. It was horrendous. And then you read that the dogs were, some of them malnourished, some of them cancerous, obviously distressed. It was a terrible, terrible scene for responders. And some of the photos, you can tell it's got to be hard on those people that went in there. I can't imagine how long it took them to get that smell just out of their olfactory senses. But the dog's taken from the home, and NEA Report did some original reporting. Sorry about that, because I know I just showed y'all the picture. Didn't mean to. But we did some original reporting and found out that this guy, his name is Roy Thomas. He's going to face 12 counts of animal cruelty over this, but he has been in trouble with the law since 1987. That was the first guilty plea in Craighead County that I could find. Just this year, he has been arrested at least twice. This is just in Craighead, right, mind you. We don't have access to records anywhere else except for the counties that are uploaded online. So, and most counties in Arkansas are, but some aren't. So he was arrested on May 19th for possession of meth, cocaine greater than 2 grams, less than 10 grams. That's a lot of meth or cocaine. On June 19th, he was already facing charges for the other one, and he got arrested again. Possession of meth, paraphernalia to manufacture meth, according to the charges. Also got arrested on November 14th for a third-degree domestic battery case, which, all of these he's now facing charges on, right? So, in addition to that, authorities had not located him as of this morning, but now he's going to have 12 counts of animal cruelty and 10 counts of lack of rabies vaccination. You can't just have dogs or cats or animals or people depending on you and go off on your drug binge. You just can't do that. And it's unfortunate. I really feel horrible for these poor dogs, and I hope that none of them have to be euthanized. By the way, Jonesboro Animal Control got the dogs now. They're going to be adopting them out. If you know anybody that might want a dog, don't give it to them for Christmas. Goodness sakes. Dogs are not supposed to be Christmas gifts. Lottery tickets apparently not either, at least for kids. But a dog is a companion, and maybe it would be a nice time of the year to introduce a new companion. Just kind of, it's always important to make sure people know dogs are not toys. Children should know that, right? And apparently an adult needed to know that in this case too. So thank you everybody for joining us on NEA Report today. We covered a little bit of extra news here for you in addition to what we found out was going on with the Malco case. Appreciate everybody for liking, following, subscribing. If you have not yet, as I mentioned already a dozen times, NEAreport.com. You can go there and get the latest headlines all day, all the time. Please become a supporter as well. We do morning headlines for everybody, summarized in text format of everything that's going on in the area, so you know what's up before anybody else is even up, I guess. I didn't even think of putting that pun together until the last minute. We try to leave all the puns out of the broadcast. Sometimes they'll slip in last minute. I'm Stan Morris. Thanks for joining us. Now you're up to date from NEA Report. Have a good one.